There exists a peculiar sensation that courses through the body in moments when something fundamental is about to shift. Not to be destroyed, but to release what has been held back for far too long. Perhaps in recent hours, you've experienced sudden anxiety, pressure in your chest without logical explanation, or abrupt awakening in the middle of the night without apparent cause. It's essential to understand that what is being perceived now is not imagination, nor a creation of a mind that cannot let go. What is happening right now is resonance. The threshold has been reached. Energy knows it. The universe knows it. And so this message arrives today at precisely this specific moment, when doubt began to weigh more than was necessary. In this video, it will be understood with absolute clarity what will dramatically change, why the persisting silence was never synonymous with abandonment, and what kind of energetic decision is now moving on levels that the eye cannot capture. Because even though it may not have been said aloud, there exists within you a deep fatigue, an exhaustion that does not come from lack of sleep, but from waiting, from giving affection without clear answers, from the feeling that time stopped precisely when a sign was most needed. And yet your presence in this place is not coincidence. Continuing to seek answers to understand why this story does not end, even though it hurts, is guided by a higher reason. It is necessary to speak the most honest truth. This person can no longer endure it. The structure of indifference and distance that was created to maintain control has begun to collapse under its own weight. There are connections that do not break simply because one side decides to flee, because they were not created only from human desire, but from an evolutionary purpose that transcends the will of the ego. When life joins two consciousnesses that are destined to evolve together, the path may be complicated, full of obstacles and silences, but it never loses meaning. Even silence has its language, a frequency that causes deep changes that are not visible now, but will soon be understood. The urgency of this message lies in the fact that the situation has reached a point from which there is no return. This person has also reached their limit. Emotional exhaustion is not one-sided, it is mutual, even if outwardly it appears completely different. While on this side uncertainty is processed through introspection or seeking spiritual answers, on the other side a battle unfolds in deafening silence. While here, doubts arise whether it was worth it, their involuntary memories begin to emerge that can no longer be suppressed. And even though the outer appearance suggests that someone moved forward and left everything behind, on the energetic level, both sides are being processed with the same intensity and at the same time. Life will not allow a genuine connection to dissolve without bringing it to the precise point where the heart can no longer maintain old ways of acting. Sometimes reaching the limit does not mean the end of the story, but the exact place where something new, more truthful, and less frightened begins to take shape. Perhaps you've repeatedly asked why suddenly everything became so heavy, why what once flowed naturally now hurts, or why this person distanced themselves precisely at the moment when it seemed everything would fall perfectly into place. The answer that the ego fears, but that the soul must hear, is that it was not a true rejection, but an inevitable preparatory phase. Destined love is not created only by the emotion of the beginning, but by the maturity that comes with commitment and truth. There were dynamics that could not continue as they were. There were behaviors that had to be broken, deep fears that had to be exposed, and emotional dependencies that could not enter the new phase that destiny prepared. The universe does not give what a person is not prepared to maintain, and when the heart feels it can no longer go on, when the mind tires of trying to understand strategies, and the soul asks only for peace, then energy acts with the greatest clarity, not because capitulation was seen, but because one has gone as far as was humanly possible. This story did not end due to lack of love, it is being redefined. And this redefinition includes decisions that this person is making right now, not from impulse, but due to the intervention of destiny that no longer allows them to continue deceiving themselves. However, to understand why this collapse is happening precisely today, we must look at what was happening behind the mask of indifference in that private space to which no one else has access. If you feel this shift, write breakthrough in the comments. It is fascinating and simultaneously painful to observe how a person tries to deceive themselves when confronted with an emotion that exceeds them. Right now, if we could observe this person's reality without filters, we would see a completely different scene than the one usually projected by fear-based imagination. There is a mistaken assumption that silence is equivalent to forgetting, or that physical distance is synonymous with inner peace. Nothing could be further from the truth. The person who occupies your thoughts is not at peace. Although outwardly they try to appear distant, cold, or even completely indifferent, internally a conflict rages that can no longer be ignored. For a long time, this person tried to maintain a pre-established normality. They get up, fulfill their duties, interact with their surroundings, and smile when it's necessary to smile. But in this facade, a crack has appeared. The fatigue that was first felt on this side is now reflected there as well, not as guilt, but as brutal awareness. They are beginning to understand what was lost, what was avoided out of cowardice, and what could not be maintained at the right moment. Life allows emptiness to speak when words are not enough, and this emptiness has become unbearably uncomfortable for those who flee. There have been attempts to fill this space with all kinds of distractions, perhaps too much work, perhaps new superficial relationships, or simply constant noise from technology to avoid hearing their own thoughts. But none of it works anymore. The emptiness can no longer be filled with distraction, nor with other people, nor with logical excuses, because when a connection comes from the soul, nothing superficial can replace it. For a while, you can try to deceive, rationalize the escape, say it was for the best or that it wasn't the right time. But the heart cannot be deceived indefinitely. Here comes the devastating psychological phenomenon for those who try to forget in the failure of substitutes. Every time this person tries to establish a connection with someone else or find comfort in activities that previously brought them joy, they hit an invisible wall. Everything tastes bland. Conversations with others seem empty. Laughter sounds forced, and intimacy feels mechanical. This happens because they experienced a different depth with you, and once the soul tastes this kind of recognition, it will no longer settle for anything less. Perhaps you sometimes asked yourself whether your intensity was excessive, whether you felt too much, or if you loved more than was necessary. But the absolute truth is that you did not love too much. You loved from the right place. The problem was not the intensity of what you offered, but the temporal misalignment between two different internal processes. One was ready to go deeper, while the other was just learning to confront what they feel. This learning that the other side is going through is usually painful because it means looking their wounds directly in the face, looking at repeating patterns and at decisions made from fear. No one changes while everything is comfortable. Transformation arises only when the current situation is so painful that a person does not want to experience it again. That's why the silence lasted so long. It was not a punishment created to make you suffer, but it acted as a merciless mirror, a space where each had to see themselves without the influence of the other, where absence spoke louder than any discussion, and where the question was no longer what the other did, but what did I do with what I felt. During this time, both sides went through different but equally brutal processes. While on one side there was forced learning to let go and find value beyond external validation, on the other side there was confrontation with what was truly being avoided. Not you as a person, but intimacy as a concept, vulnerability as territory, love as transformative force. This person began to realize that running is not freedom, but prison. Staying distant is not protection, but exile. And having control over emotions is not strength, but fracture of the self. Contemporary psychology speaks of the shadow, that part of us that we reject, hide, and refuse to acknowledge because it terrifies us. What we bury does not die. It ferments. It grows in the dark. It becomes more powerful. This person spent months, perhaps years, pushing their shadow away, denying aspects of their own heart that did not fit the image they built of themselves, suppressing desires that seemed too dangerous, silencing a truth that demanded to be spoken but seemed impossible to utter without losing control. Running from you was running from themselves. The mirror you represented was too honest, too revealing. In your presence, they could not pretend to be who they are not. With you, the mask slipped, and that terrified them, because if they are not their mask, who are they really? That question, which philosophers call existential, became personal, visceral, unavoidable. The silence you experienced was not directed at you. It was the sound of someone fighting with their own ghost. But there is a limit to how long the psyche can remain divided against itself. Carl Jung wrote that what we resist persists, and what we do not make conscious emerges as destiny. This person is discovering this truth in the hardest way possible. Each attempt to forget only intensifies the memory. Each superficial connection only accentuates the absence of authentic connection. Each moment of false calm is followed by a wave of uncontrollable anxiety. The psyche seeks balance and pushes this person toward integration. They can no longer pretend this part of their life does not exist, nor continue to deny that they abandoned themselves when they fled from you. This is the process of individuation that depth psychology spoke about, but lived through the fire of a soul connection. It is not an intellectual journey. It is a visceral experience. This person is painfully discovering that true love cannot be killed. Its acceptance can only be postponed, and postponement hurts. It hurts physically. It hurts in the soul. Resistance requires an enormous amount of energy. Pretending not to care, suppressing the urge to call, silencing intuition that screams your name. All of this consumes vital resources, and this person is exhausted. Their ego is losing the battle with their own soul. The shadow that was previously seen as a monster to be hidden now demands its place at the table. Defenses are falling because there is no longer strength to maintain them. And when ego defenses fall, truth appears unfiltered. This person is beginning to see that you were not the enemy. You were not a threat. You were not the source of their fear. You were an invitation to grow, and the fear they felt was not of you, but of the immensity of what you could create together. Perspective is radically changing. What previously looked like an unacceptable risk now appears as the only possible liberation from a gray and meaningless life. The initial rejection was an act of survival of an immature ego, but the ego cannot survive eternally against the commands of the heart. The internal struggle between fear of suffering and desire to love reaches its final resolution. This person stands at a decisive crossroads: continue protecting themselves and wither in loneliness, or risk feeling and flourish, even if it means losing control. And the scales are slowly but inexorably tilting towards surrender. Not surrender to you, as if you were an opponent, but surrender to love as a transformative force. And precisely here, in the middle of this silent and fierce internal battle between the ego that wants safety and the soul that demands expansion, a fundamental change occurred in the energy that connects you. A breakthrough that explains why suddenly everything feels different. Everything in this universe functions according to immutable laws of balance and compensation. What happens in the deep mind and shadow of this person does not remain isolated in their head. It sends out a frequency, a specific vibration that travels and directly affects your shared reality. Here comes the most decisive and most tangible phenomenon of this phase: the radical change of energetic polarity. To confirm your new path, write transformation in the comments. To understand this, it's necessary to honestly look into the recent past. For a long time, the invisible dynamic between you functioned according to the classic pattern of pursuit and resistance. Perhaps you, without conscious intention, driven by fear and justified concern about loss, sent enormous amounts of energy in that direction. There were messages, there was seeking answers, or simply there existed an obsessed and constant thought focused on their being. On a subtle level, this is perceived as physical pressure, as a constant wave pushing against closed doors. According to basic physical law, when force pushes, the natural reaction of the body receiving this impact is to tense up, defend itself, and retreat to maintain its own balance. While you energetically moved forward, the other side instinctively withdrew. While you demanded clarity, the other side built walls of confusion. It was an exhausting and painful dance in which the roles seemed firmly assigned and condemned to eternal repetition. However, recently, something fundamental changed. You changed. Perhaps it was the result of extreme fatigue, awakening of your own dignity, or higher spiritual understanding. But the reality is that you stopped pushing. You began to withdraw your energy from the equation. There is no longer that desperate vigilance over their movements. Signals seeking external confirmation are no longer being sent, and your thoughts, although they still return to the memory of connection, no longer carry that previous torturous lament. You began to focus on your own axis, inhabit your own life, and prioritize your own healing. This act, which at first glance might seem like sad resignation or a defense mechanism, actually caused an absolute earthquake in the other person's energetic system. By withdrawing the pressure, you created what is called a magnetic vacuum. Nature and energy abhor a vacuum. They always try to fill it. When you stopped occupying the entire energetic space with your presence and urgency, an abyss of silence opened around this person. Initially, this silence might have seemed to their ego like relief, a false sense of victory or freedom. But this phase lasts very briefly. Soon the absence of your energy begins to feel not like freedom, but like coldness. This person, without their awareness, became accustomed to feeding on your constant attention. Your energy was the fuel that maintained the inflation of their sense of importance and security. By cutting off this supply, the other side was exposed to emotional influences, and now a fascinating phenomenon occurs. Because they no longer feel you behind them, this person feels an irresistible impulse to look back. The law of energetic rubber band has been activated. The more you withdraw into your center, the stronger the attraction the other side feels toward you. Now, in this precise moment of silence, they truly begin to miss you. Previously, they couldn't miss you because your energetic presence was omnipresent. There was no space for nostalgia. But now that there is real distance, memory has space to land and take root. And it's not an intellectual memory, it's a physical feeling of loss. This person is beginning to feel that something vital is missing from them, that an essential part of their internal structure has been lost. This polarity shift brings an unexpected consequence for those who fled: the weight of memory. Previously, when you maintained the connection through your effort, you carried the emotional burden of the relationship. You were the one who processed emotions, suffered doubts, and kept the flame alive. By letting go, you shed this burden, and this burden did not disappear, it just transferred. Now it is the other person who must bear the entire emotional weight of the connection. Suddenly, the memories they could previously ignore become insistent and heavy. The emotions they suppressed fall on them all at once, without you to soften the fall. That's why the indifference this person previously showed is beginning to crumble. They can no longer maintain the posture of someone who doesn't care about anything, because now they feel everything with amplified intensity. They feel your absence as a ghostly presence that follows them everywhere, at work, on the street, in solitude. In the middle of their room, your energy paradoxically surrounds them precisely now, when you no longer insist on your presence. It's the irony of the universe. By letting go, you bound them. By stopping the pursuit, you began to attract. The energy you previously used to try to break down their walls, you now use to build your own stability, and that makes you irresistibly magnetic. This person realizes that your persistence is no longer guaranteed under their control, that your life continues, that your light shines without their permission, and this terrifies them. The fear of losing you forever has replaced the fear of commitment. This energetic change is real and tangible. This person now stands at a point where retreat no longer brings relief. Internal tension grows with each day that nothing is said, with each moment that the impulse to act is suppressed. What once looked like self-preservation now feels like self-betrayal. The inner voice that was long ignored is no longer quiet. It demands honesty, consistency, and movement. Hesitation now costs more energy than the courage to show up. And precisely because of this, the internal pressure becomes unstoppable. Not from weakness, but because truth can no longer remain locked inside without causing harm. What now follows is not an impulsive step, but a necessary act. An act that comes from clarity, not from fear. This story is heading toward a moment when silence no longer makes sense, and distance has lost its function. Whether the words will be perfect no longer matters. What matters is only that they be spoken. Because what is real demands expression, and what is connected sooner or later finds its way back. Here, the waiting ends, not because someone pushed, but because inner truth demands its place. If you're ready for reunion, write love in the comments.